Welcome back to the Lift Free and Diet Hard podcast. I'm your host, Andrew Coates. Join me along with industry leaders and friends on a quest to get more people through the gym door and eating and living healthier. Join me where evidence meets empathy while rejecting fitness industry fads and extremism. Let's begin. All right, this one's special. One of the most iconic figures in the fitness industry and strength, Dave Tate, the founder of EliteFTS, the host of the Table Talk podcast. I am wearing my Table Talk alumni shirt because you guys had me on down there in Columbus earlier this year, which is a big honor. And again, a legendary powerlifter and coach, author, a prolific article writer over the years. I mean, I first would have got into your stuff early in my career via T Nation, and it's great to have you on. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Great being on.
Good. So let's dive into your training. What does it look like now? You know, you've been in the game a long time.
Yeah. What's it look like now? Okay. The most concise way to make this is the only thing I care about is my squat, right? So a 1 rep max on my squat. I can't do a barbell squat. So I lean towards the spider bar for the squat, which is basically a cambered bar with a yoke on it. So every year towards the end of the year, I don't have a date. And there's a reason for that. So I try to beat whatever the PR is for that year. And this has been going on for close to a decade now. So for a long time, it was just the greatest weight I could do with reverse bands, Over the past four years, it's been trying to hit the same weight, but at a lower body weight. Where this year it's the squat triple body weight, box squat bar. And the reason why I have that as far as, I train for it like a meet. And the reason I have it sliding is because one of the most detrimental things I learned from competing is when you have a hard date, you get fucked up, right? The closer you get, you start to incur damage, right? To where if I start to break down or overreach, I can just deload and push the date back a couple weeks. Or for some reason, and this happened one time, everything's going really, really great. I can just hit that end goal in August, which there's pros and cons to that. I didn't want to do anything the rest of the year after that. But the reason why I kind of fall into this is because I love the squat for one thing. But for me to be able to actually accomplish that goal each year, I have to physically lay out the entire year. So each year I've been dropping 10 pounds, right? So that's part just in body weight. And so I just came off a pure conditioning phase, which was more cardio than I've probably done in 15 years. And now it's transitioning into a little bit of a hypertrophy. And so all this has intention of carrying over to that squat. If I didn't have that squat as an anchor, I still don't know if I could just train for fitness per se, but that kind of lays in there. So then the whole rest of the programming is just based upon 3-week waves on how that squat's going to be, where my conditioning needs to be. And the body weight really isn't that big of a deal because it's been a slow drop for the past 5 years. But this year I am going to have to be 225 when this occurs. And right now I'm sitting about 233. So I don't intentionally have to really do a whole lot, except just make sure it keeps coming down at the same click it has been.
Is there purpose, metaphor in what this is? Because obviously like, hey, I want to hit a objective squat, whatever is in the context of PR, your best of the year. But does this represent something bigger, independence, identity, any of those things?
I would say it used to with identity. And at this point, it's not that anymore. If there's a purpose behind it, because see what's happening now is the weight getting lower that I'm doing each year. And I've come to that realization that I'm getting older, and I have 2 prosthetics as well, which one of them's working on 15 years. So there's all these other variables. So the identity is the weight's not that big of a deal because it will be 675, like whatever. It shouldn't be heavy for me, but it more than likely will be. And if I let that become part of the identity, then it's gonna piss me off because it shouldn't be. It's more just the only way that I have been able to keep all the aspects of my fitness in line because if there are I do have some guardrails. Like I can't blast PEDs to be able to do this. There's a lot of things that I would have done in the past. I just can't do anymore. Right.
Yeah.
Which means I need to go through this conditioning phase. I need to go through quasi hypertrophy phase to be able to have the structure to be able to support what I want to do. Cause I can't keep doing that heavy. I can't do it heavy all the time because I won't be able to recover. At the same time, I can't go into the hard strength phase if my blood work is in shambles or I have to lock in my sleep, which is, for me, it's an issue, but it's only because my REM and deep sleep is like 10 or 11%, and I want it to be 20. I'm still getting 7.5, 8 hours. So because you see where this is going though, because this phase, I have to lock this in before I go into that next phase, because I know from past experience, if this isn't locked in, then I start going into those heavier phases, I'm not going to be able to recover, especially if I can't lean on things like I used to before in the past to fill that gap.
This episode is brought to you by KNKG, my favorite gym bag brand. For years, I did two stupid things. I bought cheap gym bags, which eventually fell apart, and I traveled with and checked a big suitcase. KNKG changed all that. In 2020, my aunt bought me a KNKG. Back then, they were known as King Kong duffel bag. Here it is. 5 years later, it's still indestructible. And last year, I spent hours on YouTube researching backpacks for travel. And I kept coming back to the KNKG Edge, which now goes everywhere with me. Travel, gym, work. I also just got a KNKG Conquer backpack and their Plus duffel bag. And these are both perfect for the gym. My main issue is I have too many bags and I can only use one at a time. Investing in high quality gear means you save money in the long run too. And I can save you guys 15% on yours. Go to www.knkg.com/Andrew59676. That's www.knkg.com/Andrew59676, or go to the link in the show notes.
And I guess in a way, does having this goal, this purpose, support the other health promoting behaviors, the fitness that promotes health and longevity? Because I mean, you've alluded to, but I'll say it explicitly, this has to remain net positive for your longevity and health, right?
It needs to be. Does it 100% support that? No, right? Because anybody in their right mind that's been around can understand that, going as heavy as you possibly can on two prosthetics at 57 years old isn't the best move, right? So it's the best way I know to control my stupidity. So is it a net positive? Yes, by a little bit. Could it be a bigger net positive for my health if that just wasn't part of the whole equation and more my training was functionally based or whatever people are calling it now? Probably. But then there's going to become this compliance thing, which maybe the identity still is pulled into this, right? Because I know all those other things will probably benefit me more, but they're not going to benefit me for shit if I don't do it. Where this, I know I'm going to be able to do, and it will align enough of those other variables, steps per day. All these other variables have to kind of stay on point, or my weight's not going to keep going in the direction I want it to go, which my body weight is what I'm talking about. Yep. So all those things got to kind of fall into place. So there is some logic behind what I'm doing with all this. Now, toward the end, when I get into kind of a peak phase, I paused on that because a true peak phase, I don't know if I would want to do, because that's going to accumulate a greater amount, of risk and damage. But a kind of peak phase, that probably isn't going to be the healthiest, because I will pull back on the steps. I will pull back on all those other things to be able to do that. And what happens after that is the reason why I need 1 quarter at the beginning of the year to pull all the conditioning back up again, because it gets pulled out during Q4. So when I start, the cardio or treadmill or whatever it is in Q1, and it's only 20 minutes 3 times a week, I can't stand it. Just like most people, I can't stand it. where now I'm coming off where it was an hour every single day. And I don't want to say I liked it, but I didn't despise it. And that's when I know it's about time to move forward, because if you start really liking it, then it's going to be a problem.
So you've implied that there are some trade-offs in this, and obviously at your competitive elite, there were some substantial trade-offs. Talk to me about, even within this, like what you've accomplished in your career. You absolutely, explicitly, anybody who's in elite strength sports, elite bodybuilding, makes potential trade-offs for career success, fulfillment, call it the status you earn from it. Talk to me about your relationship with those trade-offs, then and now.
Then I didn't care, right? So I don't want to say I was indifferent, because indifferent would mean that you just weren't aware. I was completely aware that, and I would make jokes. Like, I don't give a fuck if I'm going to have to live, with fake shoulders and fake hips and all this other stuff. And that I don't care. I'll deal with that when I have to deal with that. There are some of the trade-offs, as long as I could make it to the meet. And if I would have died after the meet, I didn't care about that either. So it was an all-in mentality, but being so far removed from that and speaking to so many other people who are kind of in that phase right now, I've over the years have understood that all-in mentality, while it is that, is all in on what you conveniently want to be all in on. And may not be all in on what you should be all in on. I think that's one of the reasons why the younger generation lifters are better now than before, because they understand there's a broader picture here, that, the higher your blood pressure can get doesn't necessarily mean the more you're going to lift. Where I was under the mindset that, the bigger you were, the more purple I was, the more ready I was for meet. And I was willing to make that trade-off from that, understanding that may lead, to other issues down the line. Now, being on the other side of that and had all those other issues that are down the line, was it worth it? I would say yes, because not just the memories and all the other things that kind of go along with all that, because I kind of predicted it. I don't want to say I self-manifested it, but I kind of knew, like, you're probably going to have heart issues when you get into your 50. Hell, you may not even make it to 50, and then, so there's no regret with any other. I would change some things only because I'm more intelligent now, on what that is, but that's also making some big assumptions that those things I would have been able to change back, like blood pressure meds don't kill your strength today like they would have many, many years ago. Right. So there was a conscious decision to not take those because it would sap my strength, where that would have been probably a better thing, to be able to control the blood pressure, especially during those peaking phases. But I was conveniently all in on the things I wanted to be. I wasn't thinking about what my sleep quality was. The nutrition, the only basis I thought about that in was, as long as I'm covering all my bases, I'm eating in the surplus, then I'm probably covering every one of my macronutrient needs, which I still don't disagree with. I probably was. But could that have all been better and led to better performance? I think so. The other thing that I think that would be different is the use and structure of the PEDs. Had it been different over my time period, I personally feel I may have been able to add 3 more years on my best, after my best 3 years, which that's the message I'm trying to get out to a lot of the lifters today that are thinking about PEDs or want to go on PEDs, is the further you can push that back until you start, the longer you could use it when you're at your best. You see what I'm saying? So if injuries are essentially what took me out, a lot of that was because of overuse and all this other kind of stuff. And had I not started as young as I did, but would trade, say the first 7 years that I was on, but would trade that for being able to add 2 more years to my actual career. I would do that in a second because that might have been 10% greater than my all-time best. And I don't think people think about that because there's going to be everything's accumulated wear and tear, accumulated damage, long-term systemic fatigue damage, no matter what you do, and it all adds up. So the more of those variables that you can strategically use, the better it would be.
This episode is brought to you by Renaissance Periodization and the RP Hypertrophy app. RP is the industry leader in muscle building, coaching, and education. And this app is like having a coach in your pocket. It gives you everything you need, including training programs, form videos. It gives you all your sets, reps, and weights, so you just show up and follow the plan. It adjusts each week based off your progress. And the app was created by Dr. Mike Israetel, Nick Shaw, and the team at RP, who I've known for many years. And the entire team are incredible people who've always been supportive and generous with me, so I know their character and are easy to endorse. My library contains several RP books, and I've used RP training principles in my workouts and coaching with my clients for many years, long before the explosion in popularity of their YouTube channel, which is worth checking out. RP is the first sponsor I felt remotely comfortable endorsing after over 7 years of podcasting. And if hiring a one-on-one coach isn't for you, using the RP Hypertrophy app is the next best thing to maximize your gains and take the guesswork out of your program. And there's a 30-day money-back guarantee, so you can try it risk-free. If you don't like it, they'll give you your money back. And I've also got a serious discount for you of up to $50 US. Go to rpstrength.com/coats and use the code COATSRP, or go to the link below in the show notes, and that's rpstrength.com/coats. Use the code COATSRP.
You mentioned the injuries, and I know that, you're also pretty legendary for having ripped up a lot of shit. And as you said, you're bionic at this point. So what have you done with your training to modify it, both philosophically and technically, to manage those injuries and to stay strong? Because obviously if you have prosthetic stuff, then you actually have to maintain the strength around them.
Yes. So it's twofold, because there's a strength side and there's going to be the function side. So for the squat, because I have 2 prosthetic hips, yes, I can squat lower than parallel if I want to, and I do. I'll get to that in a minute. But for all the heavy loading I'm going to do, I'm going to keep it 90 degrees or a little bit higher, and it's always going to be on a box. And my reason for that is it's kind of twofold. The first is the worst thing that could ever happen to me is I'm below 90 degrees and one knee comes in really hard, and then that could force that prosthetic out, basically,
Right.
or the hip out. And that could happen if you just miss the weight, right? So the box could be a catch if I'm ever to miss anything because of all that. It also saves my spotters. If anything, let's say for some reason my hip just decides I'm done, and just pops out. Well, I got spotters to be able to worry about there too. So that allows me to keep building that strength, even though, anytime it gets posted online, people are going to bitch about high squats, but you think I really care, it makes no difference. But now because of that though, I have to have it's usually about twice a week where I'll just do body weight squats, holding onto a power rack or a rope, going to full depth, holding the bottom position, so I'm not just building, one part without the other part. So maintaining the function and the range of motion the best I can. With my shoulders, the right one is the worst. It needs replaced, but I won't do it. That's been a weird one because for a long time, the way I mitigated that was just by restricting the range of motion, using a shoulder saver pad, boards, or whatever it was going to be. And I was dead set on that for years. And during the pandemic, the guy I was training with just kept giving me shit because he noticed that I could bench a broomstick to my chest. And it hurt a little bit, but not that bad. So his thought was, well, if you can bench a broomstick, then you should be able to bench 15 pounds. And then if you can do the 15 pounds, you can do 25 pounds. There's no reason why you can't bench a bar to your chest outside of the fact you're going to be a lot weaker at it. So then I started putting in full range of motion pressing. And while it's nowhere near as strong as what my restricted range is, it's way stronger than it was before. And I don't have the pain in the shoulder that I had before.
Mm.
So my old thought process on that was just don't do the range that hurts. Where my new process on that is that's okay if it's the heavy stuff you're going to really be able to push on. But if you can do it with the lighter stuff, do it to be able to not only maintain the range of motion, but see if you can get some back. I didn't think I was going to be able to get some back, and I was able to. Now, some things I just can't do. I can't do an overhead press. There's certain things I can't grab a barbell to squat. Those I'm not going to try to figure out how to hack my way to do that. They're just off of the table. And so in one degree, I don't do the things that I know will hurt it or have a great degree of pain. The next step is I will do the things that have a little degree of pain, but I can get a full range of motion. But that pain subsides after maybe a couple warm-up sets or, 4 or 5 reps into the set. I'm not worried about load. I'm just worried about that range of motion. The other thing that I'll do is regardless of the body part that I'm training, I will add in some type of loaded stretching or extended range of motion at the end of every isolation type movement set. So if it's, when I do a lot would be like a pec deck. The end of the pec deck, I will hold the last rep in the stretch position, kind of PNF it a little bit to get a little bit greater range of motion, and then hold that for like 30 count. And I'll make sure to do that with my shoulder joint, my elbows. I'll do it with barbell curls as well, dumbbell curls. Anywhere I can finish with that loaded stretch, I do that just to be able to build some resiliency in that joint. And that's really about all I will do as far as joint health and stuff like that. But I'm very conscious of it.
Just the pec deck, I can give everybody sort of a way to do this. If at the very end someone does it, then it might be wise to start with a lighter load at the end. I think.
Yes, more stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But then if all you do is just sit there in that stretch position and breathe your way through it, take some thoughtful, controlled breaths, it usually relaxes the nervous system a little bit, that tension, and you notice that, whoa, I'm getting a little bit more range of motion. It feels good. So it's good mobility work. It is training your nervous system to actually trust and feel safe in that greater range of motion, as long as you actually have the bone on bone physical capacity to move into that range of motion.
Yes. And I prefer to do that on the pec deck. If I have a second option, it will be with standing cables. The third option would be dumbbell flies, which I'll never do.
I'm not a fan of that either. Yeah. Too risky.
There's just too risky. And the pec deck there's like no risk, just breathing. It's like you said, breathing through. And the only thing that people may run into on the pec deck is the stack's going to bottom out and they're not going to get that stretch. But anybody who's doing it for the reasons like I am aren't going to have that problem.
You could hack that because you could actually just do it one side at a time, turn it a bit, and you've solved that problem immediately, right? So
yeah.
Did you ever feel invulnerable during your glory days of lifting? Or were you always conscious that, okay, there's going to be a price down the road?
I always knew that there was going to be a price. I'm vulnerable anytime something tore, that's because you got to come back from that. Right. So it's my pec tendon, when it was ruptured, it had to be muscle tears were not like that big of a deal. And I had so many of those throughout the years that after a period of time, it's just like, oh, well, the joke was, people would come to me after they would tear stuff and ask me how long is this one going to take, because I could probably figure that out. But when it would be a new one that you didn't have before, like an adductor or something, and I'd never torn that before. It's like, oh shit, how long is this going to take? Is this like a 2-week thing? Is this a 3-week thing? Is this a 6-month thing? Once I got to West Side, I was in a group that basically everybody's torn everything. So you kind of have a good scale to kind of know how long it's going to be. But when something major, that required surgery, that's that vulnerability. It's my brain. I never thought this isn't something I can't come back from. It was more, how long is this going to take? And the second order question was, what else is this going to screw up? Right? Because let's say it is an adductor. And it's okay, how long is this going to take? But as I'm training through this, what is this going to screw my back up? Is this going to screw my shoulder? Like, what are the second order consequences of training through this that I'm going to screw up while finishing this prep phase that I need to unscrew up once we get out of it? Because there's always compensations when something's hurt. So what's doing the compensating, and how strong is that? Because now if that goes, now you're really screwed. And so that would be the only vulnerability there, was after you get hurt. I tore my first pec out of high school. So I never felt at a point to where nothing could happen. Like a lot of lifters have never been hurt before, and they lift like they're Superman, like they're indestructible. And what a great feeling to have. But a lot of them end up, after their first major injury, they're done. They can never come back from that. So I don't really wish it upon anybody, but I do think that little strains, not early on, but 4 or 5 years in, after you get serious, are good teaching tools to be able to keep you grounded on what things really matter that need to be done. So the big injuries, when they do happen, you're mentally prepared to be able to come back from those.
There's a big lesson in there. And you're talking about, like, 2 hip replacements, your shoulder needs to be replaced, and yet you're still pushing yourself, striving for some representation of a best in context. And I think a lot of people are just too quick to quit when they get hurt. And I think getting hurt is a socially acceptable reason why people quit. And if anybody's interested, and this is sort of a thing for you guys, I wrote an article for you on EliteFTS, and it talks about, what causes injury risk and a lot of the stuff around managing that. So if you guys want that, message me. I will send it to you personally. Small pivot here. What gets you fired up after so many years in coaching? Like, who do you like helping the most now?
When I do the clinics, or I have the more advanced lifters out here, the lifters that have most of it figured out, those are the ones, the hard ones, the ones that are a little trickier to figure out what's holding them back. Those are the ones that give me the most fired up, because they challenge the most. Because with them, it's not going to always be as easy as what's the bar path? Where's their body position relative to the bar? It's what mentally could be affecting this. It could be technical, it could be physical, it could be mental. And most of the time it's going to be mental or technical. But with them, the technical part isn't things that you can normally see. It looks like they're bracing, but they're not. It looks like their lats are depressed and tight, but they're not. It just needs that little bit more. Those are the most exciting ones. But anytime I have somebody out, you just awaken them to something that's so common. Bracing the probably the best example right now is you can find how to brace everywhere, right? And I would say there's 2 main different ways people go about teaching it, but the end result's kind of the same, no matter how you look at it. But getting somebody to actually feel it and understand and do it is completely different. And I've had lifters come through my Train Your Ass Off clinic that have worked with 3 or 4 different coaches in person and online. And once we finally get them to feel it, and they feel that transfer of force go through the bar, the look in their face is like, oh my God, I can't believe nobody showed me this. And the whole time I'm thinking to myself, they did. You were exposed to this. It just maybe wasn't in the language that, because a lot of the times they want to go back and kind of shit on their coach. And many times I know who their coach is. I'm like, I know for a fact your coach is telling you this, but just they weren't able to get it to connect. So now when you hear what they're telling you, you'll be able to make it connect and you'll be able to see. And it could be a trust issue that they have with that coach too, to where they don't completely buy in that something this simple is going to make this big of a difference. And normally it does. I love that because that's just like low hanging fruit. Like, what are you doing with your feet? What are you doing with your core? Those are so obvious and so misunderstood by the actual lifters, right? And sometimes, and you'll know this as a coach, sometimes as a coach, you got to say things that sound absolutely stupid to be able to get them to do what you want them to do. And for myself, many times it's been recorded and put in a YouTube video. And, there's a ton of comments like, that's the dumbest shit I've ever heard. You don't ever tell anybody to do that. I'm like, who cares? This works for them to be able to get them in the position that they're in. But I did learn from those experiences that if I have to do something like tell a lifter on the squat to arch as hard as they possibly can, to tell them afterwards, this is what works for you. Do not go tell somebody else this, because all I'm really doing is getting you in neutral because you're so anterior that when I tell you to arch, just putting you in the neutral. So don't go tell people to go into this extreme arch. So it's those type of things where, sometimes as coaches, we don't want to say it because we know what would happen if they tell somebody else that, because it's so stupid, kind of what you're telling them to do, but it locks in for them to be able to do it right.
There's a whole other thing here. And I try to speak more to the general pop than coaches, but this one will be funny for coaches. I remember Ben Bruno talking about this, how Ben is a very high profile personal trainer, trains celebrities and, NBA players and other high level athletes. And he's traveled with those people before, and he may be in a gym and there's other trainers, the trainers know who he is. And he's worked with a longtime client. And I get this from some of my clients I've been working with for years. It's like, they're locked in. You don't actually really have to cue much, and you just got them doing stuff. But anybody who's watching is going, all right, well, here's this legendary trainer. It's like, well, they're not really doing much. And they're just like talking to their client's doing their thing. And there's so much context missing. And the lesson here is, if you're seeing a snippet in a video where you see someone, a trainer in a gym, whatever, you don't know that client's injury history, you don't know the depth of the relationship, how long they've been training, you're missing so much context that it is really difficult to judge. And something may seem stupid on the outside through the lens of your experience, but it might actually be exactly what works for that client. So I think that's be less judgmental sort of lens.
Absolutely. Because we can take any video on YouTube of anybody coaching anybody and just take a minute for 30 seconds. And I'm sure we can sit there and contradict every single thing that we see in that 30 or 60 seconds. Every single thing to the highest regard, because we're not seeing the whole context of just that video. What you're talking about is the whole context of the history as well, which is even greater than all that. But, it's an engagement impression world. So people are going to judge. So just get used to it and make sure you're doing your job. Oh, I can tell the coach.
And one more thing is, we tend to look at the training through the bias, the lens of what is our priority, hypertrophy coaches. And again, I think one of the more important, if not the most important thing in almost all training for all populations, you got injured people, you've got people who want to just build muscle and strength for life, bone mineral density. A lot of your training is going to look like hypertrophy training, which needs to be, I don't love the word optimized in this case, but let's go in that direction. But there is a lot of stuff that may not be optimized for hypertrophy. And again, you don't know what's going on with, is this something for mobility? Is this something that person's not feeling great that day, so they can't actually overload it, but you just want to keep them moving? There's just so much missing context. So I think it's just a wise lens. You were on, I love this. So you were recently on Brick Headstrong's podcast. For anybody who's not familiar, he's the puppet. And I actually take great pride in sort of unleashing him, because I put a million guests on there. Like all the people I know who've been interested, I'm like, here, go. And Rick pretty much just will ask me like, hey, you got any good guests? Blah, blah, blah. Like, here, just a bunch of intros. So you guys talk about community being missing in the modern gym scene. All right. And I think there's two parts of this. Does training in today's gyms have the same sense of community as in like your elite training days? I mean, you self-selected to a, powerlifting environment, literally like Westside. And then part two is, have you seen a counter swing where people want to seek more human connection community after a few years, last few years of isolation and restriction?
The first part is, it's very hard for me to look at that in a non-biased lens, because outside of maybe 1 year in my entire life, I always trained in more private clubs, right? So there's a very biased lens that kind of leads into that. So I have to kind of think back when I was in like a Gold's Gym or something like that. What were the other people doing that were not part of who I was training with or the crew I was? Because that's going to be the majority of the people, right? And the majority of the people then probably did not have training partners, right? But when you look at this through this biased lens, you've always had a training partner, you've always been in the crew. Well, there's no crews today. Where that, I don't know if there's any greater or any less, right? I just hear from my own community, the powerlifting community, that the crews are not what they used to be. And a lot of times I'll fire back and say, well, are you sure? Or they're just not around you, right? So with that, you don't really know. Can it help? 100% it can help, more sets of eyes, all that. But it's also if the person is socially awkward, it can help them, but it may work against them, right? Because a lot of crews probably won't want to deal with, somebody that's socially awkward and so forth, kind of play into that whole thing. Is there more people seeking out other people to train with since the lockdowns? I think so. I do believe that as we think we're all digital now, I do believe we're just getting started. Like, we're not to the digital age of peak, or digital peak age or whatever. We're yet. There will be a tipping point where everything will be so digital. I do believe people will crave being around other people. When this will happen, I don't know, 5 years, 10 years, but it will happen. And then bars, gyms, restaurants, things like that or something new, that may come out just for all that will kind of come into play. It's a weird thing because I don't have a lot of friends or people around me that are Gen Z, right? You need to look at what's going on in the generations that are younger than what we are, because they're the ones, that are moving up the pie.
I mean, anecdotally, here in Edmonton, there are more gyms than ever. There are more gyms opening up than ever. There are definitely more bodybuilding-centric gyms opening. The Gen Pop gyms are very busy. Again, my personal anecdotal experience is that I've never been busier with in-person training. There is tremendous demand for it. Now, that's also the product of 15 years of runway of word of mouth referral business and staying in the game. So I mean, like that, there's obviously survivorship bias in spades there. But it's definitely my impression that I've been at a lot of the events in the industry, and I hope that the enthusiasts will also, make this will make sense. I think that there was a bit of a bubble with online training, and then obviously COVID accelerated that rapidly. And I think a lot of coaches dove over into the online exclusive space, and then they're looking around on social media, and after a while they're like struggling because it's hard to differentiate yourself as an online coach unless you're I try to think of some great examples, but maybe you're a Joel Jamieson, who, legendary UFC conditioning coach, world's leading expert in like heart rate variability conditioning, all these sort of things, right? Or my friend Brianna Battles, who just owns a space of pregnancy, postpartum athleticism. Like, they're very differentiated. Or Josh Hillis and Jeb Stewart Johnson, they really own the, disordered eating, emotional eating space, right? They've got some brand capital there. But I think a lot of online coaches, it's really hard to, I help, and I always make fun, the coaches listening, guys, forgive me, but it's like, I help 31 to 33-year-old, paralegal moms with 2.2 children. It's like, that's not, you don't own any brand authority there. That's a positioning statement, right? And so I think a lot of those coaches, and knowing them, feel very isolated and that they're struggling. It looks like everybody else on their social media is doing really well. In fact, I think it's actually a big bubble. And I've been trying more and more, leaning hard into this to advocate for, don't leave the in-person stuff. The in-person stuff is fulfilling. It's more stable. Yeah. And I think that there's a bit of almost like a house of cards around the pitch to, teach people online training. Like, it's not like Jonathan Goodman's a very good friend of mine. Jonathan was never, hey, go live on the beach and blah, 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 this, and that, whatever, and leave in-person training. It's always been, let's give you some added income in an online space in addition to your in-person business. So again, but that's my perception experience.
Well, I would tell them that if they want to continue to train people and make a difference in other people's lives, they're going to have to know how to do that in person, because they're not only do they have to compete with the bubble that you're talking about, they now have to compete with large language models that are doing a way better job at what they're doing than what they're doing right now. The only thing that's keeping that house of cards from collapsing is Gen Pop, and the community doesn't understand that they can use the large language models now for that. But that's just a matter of time. Again, people would be amazed.
I'll give a perfect example. So, shout out to my sponsor, RP Strength Hypertrophy app, right? I've been using it for a while. So the reality is that you can sign up for this app. Its cost is minuscule, especially compared to these coaches selling online programs that are, very, very high ticket things, and they actually don't have a lot of coach interaction or support. And, it's module based or whatever, but honestly, I've been blown away with just how good. And Nick and Mike are friends of mine, and Nick turned around and wanted to sponsor me. Great people. So I'm I love their stuff. I have their books behind me. So that's an easy one. But then I'm like, all right, well, I got access to this thing. I'm going to use it. Let's see. I work quicker. I do less junk volume. It make those little adjustments, put a smaller plate on the bar, whatever. And honestly, just my training feels good. And I like the process. I've got something to follow. I'm thinking less about it because I've always auto-regulated. And I find it's great for its pacing and regulation. So, but that's relatively inexpensive. That's just the outward manifestation of using good algorithms and AI. And we're only going to see this stuff get better and better. So I think that people will either self-select to that, or they're going to self-select to a high relationship experience. And I think you can do high relationship with online coaching. Sure. I have a cohort-based program for women, and there's a great community there, but I respond to whenever they trust that I will be there for them. So they get the support, but they function independently. So, but I still think that in person is dynamite, and I want coaches to stay in there.
Yeah. 100%.
All right. A little bit of time left. When you and I first met was at Swiss last year, and we sat down and we had a conversation about the state of writing in the industry. Now, again, I know this stuff is probably biased a little more towards the coaches, but that's okay. Do you think that there's still an appetite for long form articles, and why should the average fitness enthusiast actually go into the articles? Again, you're passionate about having EliteFTS as a forum for this over the quick hits of social media.
My answer to that kind of changed over the last couple of years because of things like ChatGPT and the large language models. So you have to be searchable, right? Where before, it was, if somebody just searches you on Google, what's going to come up, right? Where now it's, say I'm betting a podcast guest or whatever it is, I'm not going to Google, I'm going to ChatGPT or Grok or Gemini or something like that. And I'm putting the person in. So it's doing a web search of everything that you've ever wrote if I'm putting you in there, right? So forget about, even if they just make their own blog and they're writing their own blog and there's no views, or 2 views, them and their mom, there's 2 views, that is going to be crawled by a large language model if somebody goes in there to ask who that person is. So I'll have some podcast guests I'll put in there and there's really nothing on them, right? Which is fine. I just go old school and I, do the research that I used to be able to do that. But that becomes a disadvantage for that person if they are a coach, right? Because there should be if this thing's pulling everything from the internet and everything from all over the place, there should be something that it's able to pull to be able to say who you are. And if that becomes what the next search is, which for me it already is, then they have to have something out there. So if I don't know if it even matters if it's on a credible platform or not a credible platform, but these models will leak, and put where it is from. So that will only add that credibility. So the first part of that is just from marketing and promotion. So people who look to be able to see what they're on. The second part is so they can learn more, because if you go to write an article, or if I want to write an article, my last AMA podcast was just on basic periodization, but I wanted to correlate it with 8-bit video games, like Super Mario World, right? So while doing that, I have to write that. I have to put my thoughts down to be able to correlate that. And yes, I'm using large language models to be able to kind of put that all together, but then I find gaps, like what is the work pipe? What does that mean in a periodization standpoint? What is the boss? What are the stars? What are the power-ups? And that's just taking things that I already know and teaching myself a way to be able to explain it in a different context, but if somebody's writing about treating the hamstrings, we'll just keep it easy, then they're going to put down what they know. And if they're smart and aware, then they're going to find some gaps. Like, am I missing something if the only thing I'm writing about are seated leg curls and lying leg curls? Like, where does a glute ham raise or an RDL, where do they fit in? Then they need to go fill in, as they're writing that article, they want to fill that gap, right? The same way that we would with any article that we're writing. We're going to write what we want, but it's going to expose some things in there that you're like, I'm not that sure about that. So then you got to go find it, and the other thing for people that this is a little bit different, but have been writing for a long time, is look at your article that you just written and then ask yourself, what would my biggest critic think about this? Like, why is this wrong in somebody else's eyes? Right? Then I don't want to say you can write that article to protect your bias, but at least you'll understand your way is not the only way, right? Which just provides more topics that you can be able to write about later. Because from the coaching standpoint, people do get caught up in their own bias and their own dogma, right? And that can become a bad thing for the longevity of you in the industry. It's okay to have a bias as long as you admit your bias, but do you understand that other things work? Because a lot of times you're going to find out your bias, the way you think things need to be done, doesn't work with the person you're standing in front of. And what may work for them would be the things that your biggest critic would say. And then that's what you're going to have that person do, for them to be able to progress. So it's writing, the process of taking what's in your head and putting it on paper is showing you what you know and what you need to learn to be able to become better at what you want to do. And even if it's never published, you need to build your skill sets so you can be the best coach that you can possibly be, but then understand that the basis of those skill sets need to be mastered. Because you can keep going down rabbit holes and just keep learning new shit, but never know how to do the basic things good, and then you just suck as a coach. So it's kind of multifaceted with that. But to me, the writing is a big part of that. And I don't think that's ever going to go away, because if that goes away, then the process of wanting to become better goes away. I can prompt a large language model to give me answers on whatever I want, right? I'm not going to remember that for shit until I take whatever
That's been studied. That's been studied now. We've literally seen research that there's less memory retention when you do that.
Of course. So until I take that and copy and paste it, make it my own document, you go and try to find the holes in there or to add me in there to make it more authentic or whatever it is, I'm not retaining it. It's just regurgitating it. Right now, when you're on the floor working with somebody or you're speaking with somebody, at this point, we don't have a Neuralink chip in our head to be able to pull that stuff out. We got to be able to have it in our brain to be able to pull it out.
I think it's simply one of the best ways to organize our thoughts, right?
Yes.
And this is something Luca, host of our, always talks about. And so quick shout, because you guys just had Luca on Table Talk. So everybody go check that episode. It's brilliant. Luca's very bullish on when he goes to learn something, and he's a relentless consumer of knowledge. Well, side thought, that can be a great way to procrastinate from actually being creative or building things. But what Luca does, he'll turn around and he'll teach it, and he'll demonstrate it via video. He'll write about it. He'll do a seminar, etc. And it's probably the key to why, if you ever interact with him, just the sheer amount of knowledge that seems to be in that brain doesn't make human sense, but that's the hack. So you're turning around, and as you're learning something, you're then formulating. It's not plagiarism, and you credit where you are learning these things from, but it's one of the best ways to simply learn and get better. And that's both for the coach or the enthusiast as well. So this is not coach exclusive. Everybody can follow you on Instagram at Under the Bar. They can go to EliteFTS to check out all your guys' equipment, obviously the articles, the blog. Is there anything else you want to point people to?
The podcast, the Table Talk podcast, which is on videos on YouTube and Spotify, and the audio is on all podcast networks.
If you guys want my episode, because I am proud as hell of that one, I thought it was a really great interview. You guys are great interviewers. You and Tom Shepard, who is just an awesome human being. So if you guys want that, I will send you my episode, and then you can dig into the other stuff too, because you guys have been doing this a really long time. So Dave, thanks. It's been a treat and an honor again to have you on. And for everybody listening, go check out what Dave's doing. It's, there's years of wisdom in there. So you don't want to miss out on it. So thanks, guys. I appreciate you all tuning in, and we'll see you next week.